I should start by expressing my mission. Actually, there are two levels. There's a short term mission. For almost 20 years now, I've been full time working to try to help do whatever I can to help American democracy defeat the force of fascism that I saw taking over one of our two major political parties back in 2004. And to that end, I have been trying to convey to the people who have not are not swept up in that fascistic force, um, the nature of the challenge that we face, to see the threat for what it is and to respond to it appropriately, um, which includes my publishing in 2014 a big series of articles under the banner "Press the Battle." So that's the short-term part of the mission. The long-term part of the mission is well, I don't know if it's closer to my heart, but I've been engaged in it since a life-changing moment in 1970, leading to the publication of that book, by the way, The Parable of the Tribes, The Problem of Power and Social Evolution, nicely produced by the University of California Press, still in print. The longer term mission is to get out into the thinking of our civilization, what I call an integrative vision of the human story. And I have a website now where if you want to see what my life's work is, a betterhumanstory.org. And it puts me in an awkward position because I believe something, which I think it is potentially important for me to actually say out loud, though it's awkward. I do believe that that this integrative vision of what's happened to our species and what the forces have been at work could, if it got widespread enough in how we were looking at things, it actually could have a beneficial impact on the ability of human civilization to survive. That, you may think what you want to think about my thinking that, but that has been continuously my belief since I saw something in 1970 that I've been developing, and my mission is to get that out into the world because I don't want it to die with me, and some parts of it would if I were to kick off tonight. No sign of that's happening, but the road behind is bigger than the road ahead, that's for sure. So I feel kind of an urgency. That's the mission. The word mission here is sort of a way of expressing just I feel driven in that direction because I do believe that it actually could have that beneficial impact. So one of the challenges that I face in this effort to get it out more into the world where it might realize its beneficial potential is that the claims may not be considered credible. So it's just that's the nature of the challenge. If I'm going to express it, I got to deal with the question, well, how can I get people who have the kind of mind that could absorb a well-presented way of understanding, and who could therefore carry it out into our world so that we see in an importantly different light. I say what looks to me like I can show to be true puts into an importantly different light how we understand what we are as a species, the nature of us as creatures, no small thing. How we understand what our history looks like over these last 10,000 years, and how we understand what are the nature of the challenge that we need to meet if we're going to survive as a civilization on this planet that we evolved in. I care a lot about all that. And I need to find a way to show these things in an importantly different light because, in my gut feeling, it's a toss-up whether human civilization is going to survive. I tend to think about, at what point is it 50-50? I don't know, 4 generations, 200 years? I don't know. But I can pretty well prove that we're either going to have to get our act together or we're going to destroy ourselves. I can pretty well show that to my satisfaction. So if it's a toss-up, that's how you get a guy like me to feel driven because, I don't know, I just feel called to do what I can. And it's kind of risky to say, oh, I've got something to offer here that actually might help human civilization to survive. What kind of crazy guy is that? So that makes it for a strategic challenges about how do I do this? And a couple of things that I've decided to do, not managing just managing the messaging strategy, which is all I understand. I have a young man who's helping me with dealing with the platform strategies. I'm an old guy. I don't really, it's okay with me that I don't really know how all this is going to operate. But he feels that we're building something, so that's good enough for me. How do I do that? How do I get people to look at the long-term thing that I think is the most important thing that I've got to offer? There was a time when I thought that what I had to say about the political battle in America was the most important thing I had to offer. Back in 2005, I launched a website, nonesoblind.org, which you can find on my current website as a portal. Current website is abetterhumanstory.org. I felt that in my interactions with the liberal and democratic world, I was having almost as much difficulty getting people to see what was rising on the right as I was having with the conservatives of the Shenandoah Valley, where I live, and did some radio and now do regular op-eds and ran as a Democratic nominee for Congress to get them to see the nature of what they were supporting that had taken over the right. And so for a long time, I really did feel like my mission of that era was focused on what was the ugly thing taking over the right and rallying the good guys to see what it is that's rising on the right and to fight it in the way that it should be fought. And I think it should be fought in the same way that Luke fights the Death Star, and the same way that what's his name, Avatar, forget the hero's name. He fights that military-industrial complex, and in the same way that Frodo and his friends fight things. That's what I think. And I had a lot of people saying, "You're overreacting. This is too harsh. And, do we want to stoop to their level, as if to fight with the truth is the same level as fighting with the lie?" I had a lot. But I don't need to do that anymore. I mean, I still feel like occasionally I got something to say, which is I'm still wanting to fight against Trump and the Trump party and the plutocracy and the force of fascism that's rising around the world today. The immediate battle really is important, and I still am invested. But I no longer have that feeling that I had for a number of years, including when I decided to run as a Democrat, uh, as a Democratic nominee here in Virginia's 6th District, because I had given up on hearing the Democrats say the things that needed to be said. But not anymore. I mean, the change in the Republican Party to something that was sort of hiddenly fascist to something which is openly fascist has sort of overcome the gulf that I felt there was with that short-term mission. I mean, I'm not complaining. I'm just saying that there was. That's why I talked about that both sidesism. The problem hasn't just been on the right. The problem has also been on the liberal side. That because I would say of the secular worldview's lack of understanding of there being something like this thing that's taken over the right. That's part of why it's been important to show that there's something here that isn't politics as usual. And I have put a lot of energy into saying what we see here is a coherent force that consistently works to make things more broken. And then I take the next step and say, take a look at that formulation. A coherent force that consistently works to make things more broken. Wouldn't you agree that that's a pretty good definition of something that you might reasonably call evil? I think it is. And I think it is useful to understand what we're up against, which is the name of that 2015 book of mine. That one's 1984. What we're up against, the destructive force at work in our world and how we can achieve it. I think that one of my strategies to get people to think about the remaining big picture thing is to take littler things, like I take to talk about the gun issue, or I'll talk about the abortion issue, or I'll talk about student debt, and sometimes more or less try to integrate it to a bigger picture. And if I can be credible in talking about those little things, it'll be a little bit like the painters that were sort of modern, and I couldn't understand what they were doing, but I could see that some of their work show that they knew how to paint, show something that looks like what it is earlier in their career. So I take it on faith in a sense. It becomes credible that they knew what they were doing when they do this other kind of abstract painting that I don't understand. So I think that the big picture that I paint of essentially what's happened to our species, what it meant as seen through an evolutionary perspective for our species 10 or 12,000 years ago, to take an unprecedented step onto the path of civilization, unprecedented in the history of life, which goes back several billion years, and to create a whole new situation because of the unprecedented step. And that unprecedented step has enormous ramifications that should really change how we see ourselves. And one of the things it leads to, that book back there, The Parable of Tribes, if you grasp what I think that I demonstrate, it follows from that the ugliness we see in human history is not human nature writ large, which in turn, from that follows, we are better creatures than we have imagined ourselves to be. And I would maintain that if everybody understood that about ourselves, that we had a better sense of what we were, more favorable sense of what we were, I think even if that were all that this integrative vision provided, that could be important. That could have a beneficial impact. And there's more things, though, than just that. So I try to be credible in talking about Israel, Hamas, Netanyahu and Biden. He's thinking about those things in ways that are interesting. That's what my assignment is, to speak in such a way that people will conclude. So what's a bigger picture? He says actually could be important. That's so important that he can't let himself rest as he approaches his 78th birthday, because the mission remains unaccomplished. It's out there, okay. I mean, that book was modern, but it has never been really dealt with by the culture at large, the way I mistakenly assumed it would if I could put it out there. So that's an important part of the strategy. Do something credible on the little thing that people have been thinking about. Make it more plausible that there might be something of value in this more abstract level of the forces at work that get unleashed when a creature extricates itself from the niche in which it evolves biologically by inventing its own way of life, and how that means descending into a kind of anarchy, because there's no order to regulate the interactions among these new life forms, the civilizing societies, which is a situation that never obtained in the biologically evolved order. That's not what the biologically evolved order creates. It creates something in which the lion and the zebra and the grass all work together to create a perpetual motion machine, even as they devour each other. Nothing like that in the anarchic situation into which civilization inevitably plunges. It's pretty abstract, but it is at the heart of what's happened to our species. And if we understood that, a lot of things follow from that. And I've worked, since I got that much of the picture. Back in the 14 years I wrote that book, and thinking, having a bibliography with, a couple thousand things in it, I've been working to create an even bigger picture, which I don't want to die with it. I don't want it to die with me. So I make that claim, make it as credible as I can. And then for another strategy for additional credibility, I've had a lot of years of learning how to be me. And I've imagined that I am now capable of, that I am just being me. I'm just being, without any artifice. Neither bragging nor having false humilities, but just laying it out as real as I can. And I believe that I can be, that people will see that that's what I'm doing. So that's another part of the strategy. And it's kind of fulfilling for me because, for a lot of years I was kind of inhibited about some of this stuff because of the chutzpah that's involved in saying, hey, I got something here that actually might have a beneficial impact on the human future or something like that. Well, that is actually what's driven me for 53 and a half years, is the belief that that's the case. And I've been forthright in most ways, but I've been somewhat inhibited about putting it out that there's something here that really should replace a lot of the worldview that's in the secular worldview that sort of predominates on the good guys' side in our society. I mean, the secular worldview is, I think, the main, by which I mean people looking at the world not through the fundamental prism that's afforded by a religious tradition. And that includes a lot of different people looking at the things a lot of different ways, I realize. But I'm talking to people who basically do think a little bit about the world that they sort of are observing, and that they're trying to figure out, well, what do I see, and what does that mean? And they form images of the world that are based on their best effort to see the evidence clearly and draw the right conclusions. I think that there are some important defects in the secular worldview that I've had the most to do with. It's a worldview in which, instead of Genesis being the way they conceive how do we get here, um, the Darwinian idea of evolution and natural selection, and that is in their minds as explaining how it is that we human beings got to be alive on this planet. I think that is a whole lot of people, and I expect that they predominate in liberal America. People have more or less well-developed understandings of some of the basic secular ideas, not just Darwinian, but maybe some Freudian or Marxian or whatever. But people, there's a basic commitment to the idea that evidence processed through a rational process is the means to come to one's sense of what's true and how one sees the world. And I endorse that's what I think. I mean, that's been my essential modus operandi since I was at least in my mid-teens. That was what I was trained in and brought up in my family and in my, various educational institutions. That's basically what I've spent my life doing. And what I think I'm in a position to say is that the secular worldview that's given up on Genesis and all that goes with that, good and evil in the Garden of Eden and God creating human beings in his own image and all that stuff. If you've given up on all that and you've adopted the Darwinian thing, I think that we have sort of not fleshed out the implications of that very well. And so what I think that my long-term vision is claiming, the mission is to get people to see that there are some important ideas or realities that were perceived as realities in the religious tradition, but have not existed in the secular worldview because the evolutionary perspective didn't generate those ideas like the biblical tradition did. So I claim to be able to understand, to assert, for example, that the ugliness we see in human history is not human nature writ large. That I can show that, and that can relieve us of one of the injurious components of a lot of the religious tradition in Western civilization. Things like original sin and the idea of human depravity. We have not seen ourselves as a species in very positive ways. The idea of our sinfulness is so deep that the heart of Christianity, for example, consists of a sacrifice that a divine human being makes on behalf of sinful humankind. He died for our sins. it's understandable that people would draw that conclusion. I mean, we look around at the world and we see a lot of ugliness. I mean, the ugliness of what's happening with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the ugliness that's happened in both directions between Israel and the Hamas-dominated Gaza Strip. I mean, when we look at the world stage right now, we see a lot of ugliness. But I say it's not human nature writ large. I say that it can be shown that any creature on any planet, anywhere in the cosmos, that takes that step, evolving with life in general, and then starting to extricate itself from the niche in which it evolved biologically by inventing its own way of life, which I think has probably happened in a lot of places. Any creature that does that is going to plunge itself into a disorder that generates a systemic force. And it is going to be the inevitable nature of that systemic force that the spirit of the gangster will play a disproportionate role in shaping that creature's civilization until that force is brought under adequate control, which hasn't happened yet on this planet with this species. That's one way of pointing to why I think it would be useful if you can understand the nature of that social evolutionary force and then the destructive force to which it gives rise and how that's what we need to deal with. That's what's basically the engine that could drive us to self-destruction. That's how it could have a beneficial effect, because that is what we're up against. And it takes different forms. And that brings us back to the short-term thing, which has got to do with American democracy. American democracy is endangered by a force of fascism that's taking a variety of forms, and is battling against the better structures of America in countless little arenas of battle. And then a central one is going to be the presidential election of 2024. And then, as I indicated in a video I did just yesterday about, even if Trump is defeated, is there there seems to be a real danger that even defeating the force of fascism at the ballot box will not be accepted by that force, and it will again resort to lies and violence to continue to wage war rather than to accept what everybody is obliged to accept in our democratic tradition. I don't think it's enough announced to the American people that the United States has had a lot of presidential elections. I mean, we've had 46 presidents, is it now? And there have been more than 46 presidential elections. And in every, basically we're a two-party country. That's sort of built into the dynamic of the Constitution. And it only occasionally has a third party. I can only think of 1912 when Teddy Roosevelt decided he's sorry he gave up the presidency, he wanted it back from his designated successor, William Howard Taft. And so Woodrow Wilson gets elected in 2012 because Roosevelt split the vote. But basically, we're a two-party country. We've had a lot of elections, and we've had as many presidential losers, whether it was a challenger, who got defeated by an incumbent, or an incumbent that got unseated by a challenger, like Clinton did to Bush in 1992. The thing is, never until 2020 had anybody ever had refused to accept defeat, had refused to concede defeat, had refused to acknowledge that this is the American way. And as much as they may feel unhappy with the outcome, I mean, Herbert Hoover, I think, was pretty icy with FDR driving to the Capitol steps in 1933. That's what I've read anyway. I'm a big FDR fan, so I've read a number of biographies. Whatever he may have felt, he's the first. Every other presidential loser has conceded defeat. I think that the American people need to be helped to see these realities. And like I said in the previous video, there's no such thing as being too strong and pressing the battle at this point. The good guys have zero danger of being too aggressive about it. Yeah, that line, the good lack all conviction, while the evil are filled with a passionate intensity. There's no such thing as too much passionate intensity in fighting this thing. So that's the short term. I think it helps in fighting this force of fascism to see this force in the bigger picture. One place where I have more questions than answers is what's happening in the global level. That the force of fascism has advanced so much in countries diverse in nature that don't seem to have any connection with each other. Why is it that Turkey and India and Israel and Brazil and Sweden and what is it that's happening in the system of human civilization on this planet in these decades that's weakening democracy as fascism advances? Like I said, I've asked that question. I've proposed a few thoughts, but I think there's something mysterious there that has escaped my understanding. But beyond that, we can also see that in the big picture, the battle between Biden and Trump is a battle that it took millennia for human civilization to evolve to the point where there is enough power on the part of a democratic force that it could actually prevail over the force of tyranny. Tyranny is a problem that emerged with civilization. Whether it's the pharaohs of Egypt or the emperors of other empires, there was a top-down working of power that was injurious to human well-being. In the various civilizations, the extent to which I was able to learn about these things, studying it intensely throughout the 1970s before that book came out. The basic pattern is there of a tyrannical few exploiting the many, many of whom were actually regarded as nothing more than property of the tyrant. Yeah. Slaves building the pyramids. That is not a picture of the human good being realized. And that's, I think, you look at the various civilizations, and I think that's kind of at the heart of what comes out. And even we get to centuries, a few centuries ago in Europe, we got the divine right of kings, and we got aristocracies, and top down, and people being unjustly treated. I mean, what the parable of tribes does is it shows that it is inevitable that if a creature extricates itself from the niche in which it evolved biologically, reinventing its own way of life, it will inevitably unleash a force that leads to serious injuries of the humanity inside. Chronic war, tyrannical regimes, people compelled to internalize moral systems shaped by societies who themselves were unduly shaped by the spirit of the gangster. If we think of ourselves as better creatures than we have thought ourselves to be, we will be more powerful in working toward the better world that we need to work toward, a better ordered world. If we don't order our civilization well enough and soon enough, I think I can show, take a look at on my website about the article, The Fate of Human Civilization. I think I can show that we will either have, that there's no muddling through when you get to be as powerful as our civilization is. We will destroy ourselves if we don't get our civilization better ordered in time. And I don't know how much time is in time. In 1962, it might have been too late if the worst case scenario had unfolded in the Cuban Missile Crisis. But we got through that one. But we aren't going to get through every single one. It's like playing Russian roulette. So it's important to see where we are in the social evolutionary process. We are a creature that did something unprecedented. And like any other creature that's done it anywhere else, we got swept up into a destructive process that we haven't brought under control well enough yet. I mean, I kind of wonder if I'm right that let's just say that there are a few hundred other places where what's happened on this planet in terms of the emergence of a civilization created creature. I wonder if we had a couple hundred such societies that something like us, civilization, leaving the natural order, inevitably falling into disorder, generating a social evolutionary process that enshrines certain cultural options as the only things that can survive and spread because there's a war of all against all as a systemic problem, not the nature of the creature. So let's imagine that there are a bunch of those out there, and how many of them made it? Are we par for the course? I mean, I'm not very impressed with how we're doing at this. When you've got somebody like Putin rising in Russia and doing what he's done and rattling his nukes and threatening NATO and stuff like that, have we really made as much progress in terms of making that kind of world impossible as we had any right to expect? Would this be par for the course? What proportion of the creatures that step onto the path of civilization and inevitably unleash this kind of destructive force, which I claim that I can show would be inevitably unleashed, how many of them actually get their act together before they destroy themselves? Well, I have a thought experiment that I kind of like. It's got to do with somebody who's been trained to be a historian and social scientist, who has access to somehow obtained. Don't press me on how. It has all the story of everything that's happened when a civilization creature emerged in any given biosphere on any given planet. It's got the whole record of these efforts to create to create such a species that invents this whole marvelous thing that you can see that civilization brings something new, uh, some of which is really quite marvelous and wonderful. Bach and Leonardo and Shakespeare, and the James Webb Telescope, and some of which is downright dangerous and destructive and always and constitute a threat that if that creature doesn't bring that force under control that inevitably arises with civilization, it could destroy itself. So I imagine this thinker out there, and he's got access to all these fleshed out stories of success and failure. And I'm just going to imagine that he has got as many as he needs of both success and failure, and he chooses in some good randomizing way sample of however many of each is considered appropriate, and studies all these stories. Okay, this species on that planet, they got their act together. Wasn't that wonderful? And look at how they are 5,000 years later, and they're living at peace with their planet, and the problem of war has been solved, and they're not going to destroy themselves. Here's one that blew it. They emerged. They got swept up in the social evolutionary process described there. The selection for the ways of power that creature didn't choose, didn't want, but could not avoid. Because the step onto civilization creates a world like the Athenians said, that the strong do what they must, what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. This is what always emerges, and they never were able to bring that kind of a force under control until, well, one way or another, they inflicted a civilization-destroying catastrophe on themselves, like we might with a nuclear holocaust, which is a visible possibility both in Europe and Straits of Taiwan, and not impossible. Or perhaps that this thing that we're doing in terms of disturbing the climate, which has got some vicious cycles built into it. I am not clear, though I'm married to that lovely lady who's a big climate activist, and I know something about climate. I actually talked about it in my dissertation version of that 1,600-page dissertation. I talked about climate change in 1976, but I don't really know how big a deal this is going to be. But I do imagine that it might be catastrophic. I just don't know, but it might be. So I think that we need to ask ourselves, what would that guy find? That social scientist, that cosmic historian, when he asks himself, if you look at the ones that succeeded and you looked at the ones that failed, and you did some kind of, I don't know, correlational study of, well, what are the attributes that differentiate these two groups? What is it that marked the histories of the species that made it, that ordered their civilization well enough and soon enough and thrived, versus the ones that essentially blew it, making life on their planet, maybe bringing that whole system that created them down with them. And only this thought experiment, I would really be interested to know what it would show. But a couple of things that I propose that it would show is that the sooner the civilization created species that's got this planetary civilization. Um, Recognized its challenge was what it was, that there was this force that emerged with civilization that had taken a lot of the control about how the civilization was going to develop out of the hands of the creatures themselves, because it was being driven by a systemic force that had to do with the lack of regulation that was an inevitable part of the breakthrough into civilization. How many of the species recognized that that's what they were up against? How early did they recognize it? How well did they conceptualize what it was that they were up against? How well did they analyze the way that the force of brokenness is working in its world, and what are the best ways of countering it and bringing it under control? That they would ask themselves, what does our civilization need to look like for the possibility of self-destruction to be gone? Or if that's asking too much, because you can't put some genies back in some bottles or whatever, to at least minimize the chance that that civilization would destroy itself. What's it got to look like? What is the map of the world look like? What would the design of the various political entities? What would be the nature of sovereignty? What would be the nature of the legal system? And what would be the means by which any of that got enforced? All kinds of questions about what would it look like if we were in a world in which it was no longer possible, as it is now, that our human history will culminate in a all-out nuclear war between big powers that have massive nuclear arsenals, like the United States and Russia, or the United States and China, or whatever. And how would the planet be organized so that something like catastrophic climate change would get responded to as soon as the danger surfaces, and that wouldn't it would enable the creature's civilization to be in basic harmony with the rest of the ecosystem and not be doing, consistent damage. Because no society, no creature, no civilization is going to survive for the long haul if it's at war with its environment. It's just not the way living systems operate. So envision that destination. What does it have to be? And to begin the conversation in a serious way, put in a certain amount of time and money and some of the best of human abilities into thinking, what is our destination? Where do we need to get to maximize the chance that we won't destroy ourselves, but that we'll thrive on this planet for the long haul? And then one other question, I'm not promoting answers here, but except to say that these are questions that we should put some energy into. And the other question is, okay, if that's where we want to get to eventually, or as soon as we can, what steps could we take now that would be wise and that would be help us get there as soon as we can? And again, we're not going to agree about those things, but if we're not even having that conversation, I think we're going to end up in that pile of those the cosmic historian finds among the societies that blew it. I don't want us to blow it. One of the things I wonder as I take on this mission and this new genre, which is I'm giving my all to, but I also feel weird not knowing what's out there very well. I'm wondering how much reservoir of motivation is there in the world um, to prevent our human civilization from essentially being taken over by the force of brokenness that civilization gave rise to, even unto eventually, and maybe sooner than later, destroying us. What's it going to? How many people? Uh, how much motivation do we need in the human world now uh, to have a chance to do better than we seem to be doing with respect to intersocietal anarchy and with respect to destruction of our planet when we've got we still have a system that was able to produce a fossil fuel industry, for example, to take another place where there are systemic forces. Whenever an industry has been put in the position where they could kill for money, they've been willing to do it. And we paid a big price when asbestos was willing, humanity paid a big price when asbestos in this industry was willing to do that, killing for money. We paid a big price when the tobacco industry was willing to kill for money, but we're paying a huge price for having an industry like the fossil fuel industry that's being willing to to paralyze our civilization from taking the steps that a responsible civilization has to take to avoid a catastrophe for our children and grandchildren. That's really the biggest one, and I infer from the fact that every industry that's ever been put in that position is willing to kill for money. And because I don't believe that that is true about us human beings in general, I don't think that most people I know or have known would be willing to kill for money. But all the industries are, and I think that that is a sign that there are some systemic forces at work that grow out of the market system. I've got a couple of books back there about the market system and how that too is a world where there's a need to bring the right kinds of regulation together so that you don't produce industries that are mighty and rich enough to buy a political party that are willing to sacrifice huge amounts of human well-being, probably, and huge amounts of life on Earth, probably, in order to enhance their own short-term profits. If that's the kind of thing that makes us think that we must be really ugly as creatures. But there are systemic forces that can be looked at that show that there are inevitable consequences unless you regulate some of these systems appropriately. The ugliness we see in the world around us is not a mirror on our nature. Yet people go around, and when you'll notice that whenever anybody says, well, that's human nature, they're usually pointing to something about us that's sort of a defect. I'm a believer in expectations, the power of expectations. I wasn't a great teacher, but I wasn't without some virtues. And I saw in my life as a teacher that a lot of kids live down to the expectations that they experience from the world around them. I think our species does that too. We don't expect very much of ourselves because, after all, that's human nature. Well, yeah, I'm not sure just how great human nature is, but I think it's a lot better than the way we have been taught to think about it. And that means we are capable of functioning in a world in which is built around the idea that there's a lot more kindness, a lot more sense of fairness, a lot more ... That's sort of built into our nature when it unfolds reasonably healthy way than we have thought. That it isn't that it isn't that we disobeyed God in the Garden of Eden. It's that we unleashed the force in that Garden of Eden, in that natural order that had produced us. We unleashed the destructive force. My mission is to show that destructive force, to show how much the battle that we're engaged in America is organically connected with the challenge that we have faced as a species since we took that fateful step. And that illuminates what it is that we're up against when we're dealing with the brokenness that's represented by a leader like Donald Trump and a base like the current Republican base that either wants a fascist regime or has somehow been blinded to what's right in front of their eyes, and the brokenness of the fascism that we see around the world. This is human history fighting to see whether we can put it together. Where do we need to get to? What steps can we take now? Well, the most urgent steps to take now are to make sure that this force of fascism that's arisen on the American right does not take the leader of the free world and make it the ally of the very thing that the leader of the free world was said to represent the barrier to. This is a widespread battle like World War II. And like World War II, it involves the fight against fascism. And like World War II, it is a global struggle. And at every point along the way, we need to have a coordinated strategy where we give everything we've got. And we keep a plan in our minds of how do we get from here to there. Because those creatures, I'm betting the cosmic historian would have found, that didn't see the big picture were the ones that were most likely to blow it. So I hope that people will go to abetterhumanstory.org and see where I've been working really hard for decades to show that bigger picture. And I hope that you'll subscribe to this place where I will give it everything I've got to convey something which I do believe, having looked at it intensely for a long time, could actually have a beneficial impact if it got out there into the world better. Strangely, that thing made a big splash, or a big enough splash, full-page review in the New York Times. It ended up disappearing without us ever being refuted. Nobody laid a glove on it. Not being accepted, except in very fragmentary here and there people, and not being struggled with, which completely blew me away. So here I am back. Put that out in 1984, built a much fuller picture, which I think has got more potential to have a beneficial impact. Come back into the world of 2024 to do videos, hoping that there will be people who will say, well, if he does deliver the goods, I want to know. And we'll take the time to see whether these claims are valid and whether it's plausible. They might actually have a beneficial impact because we all share this desire that everything that we hold sacred is at stake. So much is at stake in the election of the 2024, and so much is at stake about whether we blow this planet up. So much that is sacred. I think that sense of the sacred really is sort of at the core of why I feel like this mission isn't just something I'm trying to do, but it's a calling and won't leave me alone. I tried to resign myself to, okay, well, you tried, you failed, you're in your 70s, you withdraw from the field. But there is something that I don't know how to conceptualize, but I'm driven. I've been driven for a long time, and it wouldn't let go. And this is also a labor of love. So it's okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.